Napoleon Bonaparte once said, China is a sleeping giant. Let her sleep, for when she wakes, she'll move the world. So true, he said, so long ago. Out of the two most populous countries of the world, as well as the two fastest growing major economies of the world, which incidentally also happen to be the only developing economies to feature among the world's top 5. How come China, like a giant, has progressed so ahead of its counterpart India? Can India also reach there? If no, why? If yes, how? What do experts say? Let's find out. China, which was at par with India around 3 decades ago, has grown to almost 5 times our size, both in terms of GDP as well as GDP per capita. And this has happened because Chinese economy, which was already growing at an impressive 5% average growth rate during 1949 to 1979, had started growing at an unprecedented 10% average growth rate during 1979 to 2019. China's exports are almost 5 times that of India. Their gross capital formation is 7 times that of India. China has done equally well in controlling population through their one-child policy. And if we look at current population growth rate or birth rate or fertility rate of China as well as India, there remains no doubt that very soon India would be the most populous country in the world, overtaking China. And if we look closely, China currently has a higher percentage of population falling into the working age bracket, translating into lower age dependency ratio of only 40, meaning only 40 persons are dependent on every 100 working persons, as compared to 49 in case of India. However, it is expected that in few years from now, this demographic dividend will turn in India's favor. But the challenge for India would be to create enough employment opportunities to take full advantage of that. Otherwise, it would turn out to be a demographic liability. India's total healthcare spending stands at only 3.6% of GDP as against 5% in China. No wonder the same is getting reflected in health indicators like China having a higher life expectancy than India. China has done equally well on education front too. And one of the most important reasons behind China's growth story has been its huge focus on infrastructure development. While India's average infrastructure investment in the first 50 years after independence was just around 3% of GDP, when it actually required an investment of at least 6.5%. China, on the other hand, invested nearly 9% on infrastructure. In fact, our economic survey 2019 itself had called for an investment of at least 7 to 8% of GDP in infrastructure, translating into an annual investment of around $200 billion, against which we have been able to spend only about $100 to $110 billion. So the question is, why Indian government is not spending enough money on these important sectors like infrastructure, health, education, etc.? And the answer is simple: because we don't have enough money. So it's a vicious cycle. We are not able to make money because we don't invest money, and we don't invest money because we don't have it. So what is the solution? Can we borrow? We are already borrowing enough. More borrowings would mean our fiscal deficit going for a toss, which would result into downgrading of countries' sovereign ratings. And that would jeopardize the investments coming from foreign investors. Can the government increase its tax collection? Yes, that is an area where we have huge scope. India's tax to GDP ratio is just 10.9% as compared to Chinese 20.1%. You'd be surprised to know that less than 1.5% of Indians are actually paying income tax. So, what we need to do is not only work on improving the compliance but also broad base our tax structure so as to include more number of people in the tax net. For example, agriculture income in India is totally tax free, which is okay as far as poor farmers are concerned. But why can't we ask the super rich farmers who are earning, say, more than 1 crore per annum through agriculture income to start paying some tax? That would be economically correct, but politically very, very difficult stand. Let's hope someday some politicians will be able to muster the courage to at least initiate a discussion on these lines. Anyways, another source of money which India can and must work upon is to encourage private investment, both domestic as well as foreign investors. So, what are the various steps we need to take to attract investments? First, rationalization of tax structure. If we broad base our tax structure, we can create some scope to bring down our tax rates, and that would also increase the compliance and in turn the overall tax collection. Second, we need to provide consistency in our laws, rules and regulations. Of course, we cannot be as consistent as China because they have a single party communist rule, whereas India is a democracy. And every 5 years there will be new government and new style of governance. But that is something we should not be feeling bad about. After all, democracy is our biggest strength. In fact, India is an example for the rest of the world that a very large country with unparalleled diversity can still make significant development gains within a liberal democratic setup. But that doesn't mean we cannot have any guarantee on laws. At least we should try not to make any retrospective change, as was unfortunately done in case of Vodafone few years back. Third, we need to further streamline our land acquisition process to facilitate investments. And fourthly and most importantly, we need to improve our ease of doing business. Mr. R.S. Goswami, President of Federation of Madhya Pradesh Chamber of Commerce and Industry, quotes an example of one businessman who wanted to set up a hospital. 3 generations have been struggling to get a license. Their file ran into 1000 pages. The request was getting rejected on flimsy grounds like no stamp on the papers. You have not made provision of a separate bathroom. This photocopy is missing. 4 empty envelopes were not attached, etc. This license Raj needs to end. One of the biggest deterrents in ease of doing business is our existing set of labor laws. No wonder India ranks 103 out of 141 countries on the competitiveness of its labor market, according to the World Economic Forum. For instance, the Industrial Disputes Act required companies to seek permission before retrenchment of workers if the establishment had more than 300 workers. And if that was not worse enough, it was subsequently lowered to 100 workers. To not being able to fire people irrespective of a change in business conditions naturally meant that businesses would keep their number of employees at less than 100 or to outsource work to informal enterprises which didn't have to meet such compliances. Consequently, India has created a structure that incentivizes informalization of the economy. and encourages companies to remain small, employ fewer workers, or use capital intensive methods of production. For example, an average textile firm in India has about 240 employees, while in Bangladesh, garment factories have an average of 797 employees per enterprise. And obviously, small firms cannot have the economies of scale and cost effectiveness, thereby rendering them inefficient and uncompetitive. The ability to scale is primarily why low-end manufacturing firms that have vacated China in the last decade moved to either Bangladesh and Vietnam in case of apparel, or Vietnam and Indonesia in case of leather and footwear. While all these labor laws were meant to protect those who were employed, they actually prevented investment, which in turn prevented the creation of job opportunities, and therefore ended up doing more harm to the labor than good. In fact, more than 90% of workforce in India is in informal sector, which means the existing laws protect only 10% of the total labor force and actually come in the way of creating job opportunities for the rest. In an attempt to attract the firms expected to hopefully exit from China post COVID-19 pandemic, recently some of the state governments in India have made some big bang announcements relating to labor reforms. Like UP and Gujarat have decided to suspend 38 labor laws for industries for the next 3 years, while MP has exempted new manufacturing units from all but some provisions of the Factories Act 1948 for the next 1000 days. While some experts opine that these reforms would actually act as a huge catalyst in attracting FDI, but there are many who think that these ad hoc announcements regarding temporary suspension of labor laws are actually not reforms, but are only a knee-jerk reaction and will fail to attract foreign investors, as the investors are generally more interested in relatively consistent and predictable rules and regulations. The right example of a well thought out and consistent labor reform initiative would be the one taken by the central government, which is in the process of legislating 4 labor codes to subsume existing 44 central labor laws. In fact, one out of these 4 codes, that is Codes on Wages 2019, has already been passed by Parliament, and remaining 3 have also been tabled in the Parliament. Having said that, it would still be difficult to say at this juncture as to whether these labor reforms would be sufficient to attract the companies out of China, because of multiple reasons. First, closing down an existing setup and starting afresh altogether costs huge money, and benefits of relocating must outweigh the cost. Second, there are several factors an investor would be considering before making any new investment. Labor reforms is just one of them. Third, China is also making a lot of offers to the investors to stay back who are contemplating exit. And fourth, it seems like that China has already come out of this pandemic. So investors are still adopting a wait and watch strategy to see how things settle down post COVID-19. Nevertheless, one thing is certain, where most of the experts would agree, is that China has lost the trust of the entire world. And that is where India eyes an opportunity. Jai Hind.